And today finds me in southwest New Hampshire. I got the idea for doing the tree study on this mountain last year while I was doing the trees of Boston's Blue Hills Reservation. And you could see Mount Monadnock from those hills. Well, this is several times higher. Those hills were 300 to 400 to 500 feet high. This is over 3,000. And we got a great view of it from New Hampshire Route 124. Beautiful little wetland here too. As we come over this wetland here, let's take a look at Mount Monadnock. It's about 2,000 feet higher than where I'm currently standing, and is one of the more popular hikes in New England. Has incredible views from the rocky summit. Even though it's only 3,100 feet high, the land use history of this mountain has created this rocky open summit. It is not high enough to have a tree line based on the climate or coldness of the mountaintop, but it is because of repeated forest fires that were caused by human activity. We'll get into more of that later. Several different ways up the mountain. I'm going to concentrate on going from the south side. There's several different routes up the mountain, and I'm going to try to zigzag my way up on the lesser known trails so we can get a better look at the trees without a lot of other people in the view. And we'll take a look at the views from the top. And I can say it's less than a 10-minute walk at a moderate pace up to the official trailhead here off of the old toll road. And I chose this route to try to avoid some of the crowds and also zigzag my way up the mountain to see a little bit more on the way up. So the old toll road actually brings us to the Parker Trail and then to the Cliff Walk Trail. And we'll start looking at trees as we go down this trail and comment on the ones that I think deserve the most attention. I'm going to zigzag my way up the mountain, try to not retrace my steps today. I planned this route based on studying the satellite view as to what we could see from above. At least I could see the treetops. And we've just come up the old toll road, short distance, easy hiking. We're at about 1,800 feet. The summit is almost 3,200 feet. And we're going to go east on this Parker Trail right here to the Cliff Walk Trail, and then try to find our way back over to what's called Monte Rosa, and keep zigzagging our way up from there. There's a lot of options. I may not stay on this planned route, but that's what I had in mind to start. And from Monte Rosa, we'll try the Smith Summit Trail to the summit, and then try to come back down the Marlborough Trail to the Marion Trail, to the Mossy Brook Trail, to the Cart Path, and back down what's called the Halfway House Trail, back to the gate in the parking lot on Route 124. And as we walk across this Parker Trail, we're greeted to some beautiful forest of ferns at the ground level. And plenty of northern red oak growing back here with its furrowed bark, with these large plateaus between the valleys, or the furrows. So if you think of those furrows as the furrows a farmer would make as he's plowing his field, sometimes they start zigzagging and looking a little squiggly, like the tracks a skier would make as they go down the mountain. Lots of northern red oak on this south-facing slope. Historically, this mountain had a lot of red spruce. From what I can see on the satellite view, it still does. And most of the trees I'm going to record today already have entries on this channel with a lot more detail on how to identify them. So we'll just do a quick passing over of these trees and not get into huge detail on how to identify them. One of the 3 maples I expect to find today is an understory maple called our goosefoot or striped maple. These large leaves about the size of your hand that resemble a goosefoot, or the track a goosefoot would make in the mud or the snow. And plenty of stripes on the bark for easy identification year-round. There's a tree that grows in the understory as well. It has striped bark called the alternate leaf dogwood. And could be a point of confusion with those trees. So I did an entry on that last summer with the summer identification of the striped maple and compared it with an alternate leaf dogwood. We'll see if we can find that today, and we'll make that comparison. And continuing on the Parker Trail at about the 1,800 foot elevation, we're not really climbing at this point. Take a look at one of the more common birches, especially as you go into New England and get away from the coast. The yellow birch, with its curling and furling bark, is common on all four sides of the mountain if the mountain has enough soil and enough moisture to keep it happy. In this case, we're on a gentle slope with decent soil. So in more southern locations in this country and in southern New England itself, it's often just found in the moisture ravines and north-facing slopes. But as the weather gets cooler and moisture in New England is common in a lot of places, and has a more of a bronzish yellow color to the bark as opposed to the white color of the paper birch and the gray birch. I would expect to find those today. I've already seen some on the way up here today, so I would expect to find some. But if the forest hasn't been burned or cleared or disturbed in any manner, this is what you would normally find. This is your main birch in central and northern New England, with a little bit of black birch at the lower elevations where it's a little warmer. So we'll see if we can find 3 or 4 birches on this hike, along with 3 or 4 maples. And I would expect to find several species of conifers on this trail, trees that have cones and evergreen needles, with the exception of the tamarack, which does lose its needles. But most of the ones I would expect to find do have needles that stay around year-round. And traditionally, historically, this mountain had huge stands of red spruce. And from what I can see on the satellite view, some of those still exist. And I believe what we have here is our red spruce, growing at 1,800 foot elevation. It's got a shiny needle that's quite pointy at the end. It's a medium green color, and has cones that are larger than the black spruce, which I don't expect to find much of on this mountain, but there could be some in some of the bogs, or maybe even near the summit. As you get up in elevation in the Appalachian Mountains, near the highest elevations, you can find black spruce, but normally it's contained to wetlands at this latitude, bogs where it can be found growing next to balsam fir and tamarack. This red spruce has a medium green color. The black spruce is more of a bluish green, and it's a duller. It doesn't have the same amount of shine or luster. And on the larger trees of this red spruce, we can easily find the cones either on the tree or underneath it. And between these red spruce saplings, and these are saplings, there aren't too many large trees on this Parker Trail that are red spruce. We have the smooth gray bark of our American beech. Unfortunately, smooth gray bark is becoming less common on these trees. Beech bark disease, I'm not that familiar with it. The years I did this channel in the Ohio Valley, I never saw evidence of it. So that's something I'm going to have to learn as I go. But it's not uncommon to find what used to be a smooth gray beech bark getting what looks like goosebumps on it, to the point where it actually disrupts the ability of the tree to send its nutrients from the ground to the leaves up top. So I'll do more with this when I can get to it. I'd like to put this on this channel. I need a little more time to read up on it, but like a lot of other tree diseases, It is not native to this continent, but with products being shipped from one continent to another, often the diseases come along with them, especially if the products are made out of wood or the plants are being moved from one continent to another. So most of the beech I'm seeing back on this slope here is no longer smooth gray, but actually bumpy, but still living with its easy to identify leaf with these parallel veins and a singly toothed edge. So it's got some teeth that are about the size that you would see on maybe a wood cutting saw, but not a real fine tooth edge like you would find on a hacksaw. Many of our other hardwood trees on these mountains have a finer toothed edge. So with these parallel veins and a larger toothed edge of this beech leaf, it's pretty easy to identify. And the curling and furling bark of our younger yellow beech or yellow birch trees can often give way to a more blocky appearance. And this can happen on the black birch as well. Usually the black birch won't get 2 feet in diameter like this yellow birch here though. And the color still remains a bronzish yellow color. The black birch will be more of a brown color. And if we look up the tree, we can still see some curling on some of the smaller branches. So it doesn't completely lose it, but it often gets this blocky appearance. Boy, that's always a good sign to see yellow birch is getting this big. That means the forest has been left alone for quite a while. I recorded these larger yellow birches in what's called a first growth forest on Wachusett Mountain a few months ago. That's in my spring birch study on this channel, part 2, called The Birches of Wachusett Mountain. And here's another fine example of the northern red oak bark. And we'll look at some leaves and acorns as the opportunity arises. Nice broad ridges between these furrows. Sometimes the ridges are flat on top for a couple inches. And if this mountain is like the other mountains in this area I have hiked, we may not find any other examples from the oak family or the oak genus, the Quercus genus. Here's a second variety of maple that's quite common. I've seen more of this than the sugar maple so far, but we'll keep our eyes open. This red maple has a bark that's just a little more shaggy, and the flakes, when they do come off, usually flake from the bottom and not from the side. In other words, the flake doesn't open like the page of a book, but more like the hinge. I'll take that back. Like I'm showing right here, where the flake is loose either on top or bottom, but not on the side. So I can see the leaves clearly from here, but it would be hard to show up in this video. And you know, when the shade is deep enough, these red maples don't make seedlings underneath the parent tree. So often you find the seedlings in an area that's getting more sun. And in the wintertime, for at least 6 months of the year, this is the best way to identify them, at least the larger trees, is by this bark. And we'll look at some sugar maple bark when I see some to compare. And after a steep scrambly stretch with a wooden ladder to help you ascend the cliffs here on the cliff trail, we got some leaves to look at from the trees we have already mentioned. Got a red oak sapling here with not deeply notched, but just shallowly notched lobes with points on the end. And our red maple with the edge of the leaf that looks like a torn piece of paper. If we start seeing maples, aside from the goosefoot maple, that have a rough edge that looks a little more uniformly torn and not roughly torn, it could be mountain maple, which could be growing on this mountain. I've found some of it in this area, but it wasn't too common. But as you go further north, you can often find it, especially on ledges where there's plenty of sun. And just a few hundred yards past that, we've got a nice grove of red spruce, pretty much red spruce growing in here, with a chance to look at these cones in detail because they're littering the forest floor. As these trees get larger, they do make cones. Most plants don't make seeds until they're been around a while. Their first priority is just to get established, and when they're old enough and strong enough to set seed and make babies, if you want to call it that, they do, just like most animals. This guy's about an inch long. Most black spruce cones are smaller than that. I don't expect to find them today, but if we do, we'll do a comparison. I'll put one of these red spruce cones in my pocket for future reference. But the bark of this red spruce often looks like little potato chips or corn chips. It definitely has more of a purplish color than that of the black spruce. As a matter of fact, the bark could almost be confused with the color and the pattern of a black cherry. Well, I sure made the right decision choosing to take these Parker and cliff edge trails, because I've only seen 3 people so far on a weekend in peak vacation season. So even well-known places, you can often find solitude if you study the trail maps and just try to find a route that most people wouldn't find appealing. And I mentioned when we looked at the edge of that red maple, it looked like a roughly torn piece of paper. Let's take a look at this mountain maple. So the teeth on the edge of this mountain maple leaf still are pointed. And I think we've got that leaf to come into focus finally. So the edge of this mountain maple leaf has some points on it, but they're fairly evenly spaced and evenly toothed, and about 1/4 inch in size, those teeth. And doesn't have that obvious goosefoot appearance that the goosefoot maple has. And it does not have the striped bark either. It's more of an even gray bark. Could be confused with a red maple, especially in the winter time. Doesn't get anywhere near as large as the red maple. Usually it grows in clumps in areas with at least some sun, or areas that used to have some sun. So this is kind of a area with some breaks in the canopy here, and it seems to be doing quite well here. Often the stems on a red maple retain that red color, and these have not. They're an even green color. So again, more common as you go north, more common in areas that get partial sun, and we'll keep our eyes open for it as we go up Monadnock Mountain here. So this would be our 3rd variety of maple so far. We do have some goosefoot maple growing right here as well. So the teeth on the edge of this goosefoot maple are much smaller, maybe 1/8 of an inch at the most, and quite pointy. And we're getting closer to the open stretch of the cliff trail here. And along with our mountain maple in the understory here and our striped maple, here's our mountain maple again. I'm starting to see quite a bit of this witch hazel, which is fairly common in southern New England. As you get further north, it becomes less common. It tends to grow in clumps. It tends to be in the understory, maybe 20 to 30 feet high, with a wavy edged leaf that almost looks like the edge of a Ruffles potato chip. And it's got some insect damage as well. Come up here in the late fall, usually between Halloween and Thanksgiving, you start seeing the naked branches, or the leafless branches, covered in a kind of a dainty looking pea green flower. It doesn't really look like a flower at all, but covers the branches. I'll got information on that on this channel that I took in November a couple years ago. And after observing the views at that last stop, we've come down into this saddle that's almost entirely red spruce. And the history of this mountain does indicate there was a lot of red spruce on this mountain. And the mountain was burned in the early 1800s to try to clear the bottom slopes for agricultural use. And then the entire mountain was burned to try to eradicate the wolves that were living up here that were preying on the sheep on the lower pastures that had been cleared. Let's make our way over Hello Rock Trail. We're going to try to make our way over to Mount Rosa. Had about 6.5 hours to complete this adventure today. We're going to see how much we can actually do and still make videos. When we run out of time, we'll have to just hightail it back down the mountain to get home in time. But so far we're finding lots of trees and not a lot of people. So we're going to keep on the path that I had mapped out, and I think it's working real well right now. And one thing I can say is where the spruce exists on this side of the mountain, sometimes that's all you see for a distance. So let's this is a tree you're going to see a lot of if you climb this side of Mount Monadnock. And they can get quite large. They're very valuable commercially for building materials. This has been a state park for a long time, so none of these trees have been touched, and they've had a chance to reach their potential. This one's here is about 2 feet around. Again, that's a purplish bark with the texture. I'll tell you what, if you weren't looking up, it could easily be confused for a black cherry, but obviously it's not because of the evergreen status and the branching patterns. And the younger trees are a little smoother with just some little flakes and little flecks in the bark, but no sap blisters like you would find on a balsam fir. These little dimples are not sap blisters, but they could be confused with those of a balsam fir. There's supposed to be balsam on this mountain. I don't know if I'm going to find any. I did see some in the lowlands on the drive over here in the swampy areas at a lower elevation. And we'll keep trying to avoid the crowd. So far, so good on these lesser known trails. Start the Monte Rosa Trail, which goes to a little open area. It looks like it has some good views. And boy, sometimes in the mountains, these red maples get this really shaggy bark. And I looked up and it is not a shagbark hickory, but it definitely is a red maple with this bark again that's hinged either on top or on bottom, but not on the sides. Haven't seen much sugar maple on this side of the mountain. Maybe a little too dry of a soil on this side of the mountain. Sugar maple likes moist soil that's fairly good, very good amount of nutrients in it. If it's real dry, rocky, or sandy, you won't find it. But this red maple, often in the mountains at least, can get this flaky appearance, which could easily be confused with a shagbark hickory if you didn't look at other features. And scrambling up the Monte Rosa Trail, I'm getting some openings in the forest canopy. And, you know, paper birch is real common in areas that have already been cleared. But in nature here, this area was cleared by wildfires 200 years ago, and normally paper birch won't stay around that long. I'm sure it was very common on this mountain at that point. At this point, I'm not seeing a lot of it, but here's some right here where there is some sun and giving it a chance to grow as a seedling. This tree isn't that old, but unlike the yellow birch, it has a much lighter color. Sometimes it gets a little dingy from the mold and mildew and lichens. And if you find a piece that's freshly peeled back, it's almost an orangish color. And the bark can be pure white where there isn't as much mold and mildew on it. We've got a yellow birch growing here too. So obviously this soil here isn't so droughty that the yellow birch can't survive, but it may not prosper well on this rocky ledge here. Starting to see a little bit of mountain ash as well. We'll record that when we find some a little closer to the trail. Again, our yellow birch has that bronzish yellow bark with small curls and furrows. Paper birch tends to peel off in larger sheets that look like pieces of paper. Wouldn't be surprised at all to find some gray birch on this mountainside as well, where it's getting more sun. And a sea of hay-scented fern and even a little bracken fern growing in this area with lots of sun coming through. And this is prime habitat for that mountain maple. And boy, we've got a whole bunch of it here growing in clumps, maybe 20 feet high. But even got some little helicopter seedlings on it, similar to other maple seedlings, or seeds I should say. And again with our tooth edge that is not too jagged, but fairly evenly toothed with about a 1/4 inch tooth right there. And the sub-summit on the south side of Monadnock Mountain is called Mount Rosa. It's 2,500 feet high. We still got 600 feet in elevation to gain through what appears to be mostly spruce trees near the summit, and no trees at all on the summit, again because of the forest fire damage a couple hundred years ago. It burned the summit so severely that what was left washed away. The soil washed away. There was probably just what they call organic soil up there, not a lot of mineral soil. So without roots to hold that organic soil in place, it can wash away and it can also burn. And it'll take hundreds of years for that soil to reform, and it probably won't reform in places where people are trotting on it on the summit, but maybe in some of the more sheltered areas with less foot traffic. So let's take a look at our view here. We got plenty of spruce up here, and I believe this is all red spruce. It has those medium green needles. They've got a little bit of a luster to them. These cones are a little small for red spruce, but I'm not expecting black spruce up here, but sometimes it's a little hard to tell. So we'll assume that it's red spruce. And I might get proven wrong, but some of these trees are only 6 or 8 feet high. Even this one here is only 3 feet high. The one in the foreground's got cones on it. So it's how old the tree is that determines whether it gets cones, not how large it is. And growing on this rock ledge, a tree can live a long time and not have a lot of height or girth to show for it. We're looking mostly to the southwest here. Southwest, straight south towards Worcester, Massachusetts, and Wachusett Mountain. Southwest towards the lower hills of Massachusetts, and then west towards the Green Mountains of Vermont. We'll get a better view from the top here. But this view alone is worth having. Just a little bit of haze in the air today. We can still see a good 30-40 miles. I believe I've got Stratton Mountain in my views, just to the center of your screen there. And looking southwest along the Green Mountain Range, past Mount Snow. And I don't think I can make out Mount Greylock yet, but I'll be keeping my eyes open for it. And we're going up from Mount Rosa on what's called the Smith Summit Trail. And if anybody had told me I would have seen only 3 people on these less known trails, I'm not sure if I would have believed them. If anybody had told me I would have only seen 1 variety of conifers so far, I might have believed them. But here's our second variety of conifer. Here's some eastern white pine. Why isn't it growing up? Well, it is growing up, but it's also growing out. So trees will seek out sun wherever it's to be had. It may have been damaged from fires or storms or ice. So I can't say I've ever seen a low ground hugging white pine before, but these other red spruces are doing the same here. on this challenging thin soiled ledge here on the way up from Mount Rosa. And we're going to run out of trees eventually, but we're going to gain the view that this mountain is famous for. And what was overcast is becoming sunny again, so let's keep climbing, look at some more trees, and reap the scenic rewards that make this mountain so popular amongst all the hikes in New England. And plenty of scrambling as you ascend the Smith Summit Trail. Plenty of open ledges, plenty of great habitat for this gray birch to get established and maintain itself in full sun here. So our gray birch has smooth bark that's white instead of bark that peels off like the paper birch. So it retains a smooth bark at all sizes of the tree. You might find the smallest little peel on it once in a while, but nothing like the sheets that come off the paper birch. We didn't really look at the paper birch leaves. A lot of these paper birches are either dead or dying. And not from diseases, but just probably from old age and lack of sunlight. Well, this gray birch is getting plenty of sunlight, and it's not very big, but it may have been around a while. It has a unique arrowhead-shaped leaf. The paper birch leaf with similar colored bark would not be so pointy at the end, but more of an oval shape. There's a real good example of our gray birch leaf. But in the wintertime, look for a tree that often grows in clumps in full sun situations, along highway cuts, in areas that were recently logged or burned, and that's where you will often find the gray birch. But in nature, this is where it wants to be, and this is where it will be. Most of the other forest on this mountain has gotten too much shade for these trees to reestablish themselves. Well, you come to the mountain to try to teach a lesson, but sometimes the mountain has a lesson for you. Matter of fact, it almost always does. And I can't say I'm familiar with this plant. I've probably been by it before, and maybe when the berries weren't out, I just didn't pay much attention to it. But these are beautiful little red berries on this plant. And don't quite look like the wintergreen holly that grows in moist soils in the lowlands. But again, I dusted off my playbook. I mentioned that in one of my other lessons recently. You know, you learn trees in the classroom setting or informally on your own, but not always on the trail. And if you don't see them, you kind of forget they exist. Well, I had a hunch this was mountain holly, and I just did some ID work on it. And I believe that's what we have. And it's got these beautiful little red berries about the size of a pea. And some nice deciduous leaves. And a kind of an ordinary looking bark. Just a few little lenticels on it. Right there. So in wintertime, I'm not sure if that would be enough to identify it without learning some of its other features very well. One of the other plants I'm seeing just a couple of is the mountain ash on this mountainside. We may not record that today, but there is some of it scattered amongst these mountain hollies. But the mountain holly is quite dominant on the top of this Smith Summit Trail. We're getting near the summit, where all the crowds are, but I just saw my first person on this trail. These trails are all clearly marked on the map, but most people are taking the more advertised routes to the summit, which are probably a little easier and quicker, but also very busy. So let's keep ascending here. We'll get a good look at the view from the top. I may not have time to record too much on the way down, but we'll certainly could pick up where we left off on this mountain. There's many other routes to the summit from different directions. And a couple hundred feet below the summit, we've got a whole forest of this mountain holly. I'm going to have to take the time to learn this plant better. I don't recall ever seeing it in the higher elevations of the Adirondacks, but again, if it wasn't in berry, it may have escaped my attention, but beautiful. And there's some mountain ash growing up here as well, quite a bit. On the White Arrow Trail, I'm away from the Smith Summit Trail right now on the White Arrow Trail. And all kinds of these compound leaves with a jagged edge on this mountain ash. There's two varieties that grow in New England, and I'm not sure which one this is, but they're pretty similar looking, have similar features. Tends to grow in clumps in areas with partial or full sun. So this would be a great place for you to find it, and that's what's here amongst the red spruce and mountain holly. You can see we're in close proximity at the summit now. And the Smith Summit Trail is very lightly used. It's got these little white dots on the rocks. Easy enough to follow with no snow cover. Without snow cover, most of these trails would probably be difficult. They do have some rock cairns up here. So let's take a look at the top of the mountain here. This is why this is such a popular hike, folks. Look at all these people up here with this 360-degree view for not a lot of climbing time. It's 2.5 hours climbing time for most people, but most of them are taking the main routes. These other trails that are clearly visible on the map are not being used hardly at all. We'll stop one more time at the summit and take a complete look at the view. And we're at the summit here, folks. A lot of people up here. I'll keep my voice down. I'm going to pan around from the west. Green Mountains coming down into Massachusetts here. I see a large lake to my southwest. I believe that would be the Quabbin Reservoir, which is the main water supply for metropolitan Boston. A mountain that is also a Monadnock, which is a geographic term for a mountain that sticks up by itself. Wachusett Mountain is on this channel. I did a spring birch study down there in May. And then Mount Watatatic, North and South Pack Monadnock Mountains, right in the center of the screen here. Kidder Mountain, I did the part 3 of the birch study on, is somewhere in this vicinity here. And Boston is way off in the distance, and I do see it. It's pretty good at visibility today. It's about 60 miles away. I can see it. I don't know if the camera can, but that's about where it is. We're at 10-inch zoom. I'll retrace this route I took up on the map. I don't believe I'm going to be able to take the entire route I had labeled because of time restrictions. I've got enough daylight to do it. I don't have enough time because of other commitments. We're going to head back down the White Arrow Trail, I believe it's called, to the halfway house, which doesn't exist anymore, but there is a residence, a private inholding right near where the halfway house used to be. I've got that in the screen right here. So certainly would be a good reason to come back here to do more tree study, but I think we did a lot of the common ones you would expect to find, especially on this south face. Yellow birch, red spruce, red oak, red maple, mountain maple are all very common, and that mountain holly in the area between Monte Rosa and the summit. There's where my lesson was for me to learn today. Let's go around and look the other direction. And looking the other direction, we're going to zoom in on Stratton Mountain to our west. Almost 4,000 feet high. Zoom out just a little. I think I've got Killington Peak in my sights, with its distinct rounded summit with several shoulders. That's about 4,200 feet high. Just to the east of that is a mountain of similar geology and height as Monadnock Mountain here, and it is another Monadnock. That's the Scutney Mountain, which I believe has a road to the top. I'm not sure if it's still open. That's right near the Connecticut Valley, and it's at over 3,000 feet, and where you start at the bottom is under 500 feet. So it has quite a appearance from the Connecticut Valley as you drive up I-91. And the White Mountains are hazy, but they're there. And I don't know if we can see them all, but we're going to zoom in as far as we can and see what there is to see. And I don't know them well enough from this direction to start naming them. I'm going to go from a known point, North Pack Monadnock Mountain, which is on my other channel. We're just going to zoom around towards Lake Winnipesaukee, right up the Merrimack Valley towards the White Mountains and past them, and all the way over to Mount Ascutney on the Vermont-New Hampshire border. And we've made it back down Mount Monadnock. I took the White Arrow Trail southward off the summit. And we'll look at that in the map in just a minute. I'm back in my home territory. It's a few days later. I have time commitments some days. Don't allow me to wrap up the hike on the hike, but sometimes a few days later I put the wraps on the adventure and summarize what we found and start looking forward to the next one. Got a huge boulder here. This is the Tri-Town Trail in New London County, Connecticut, near the village of Wachusett. Huge boulder here. Probably didn't get pushed too far from its original ledge. Usually they aren't too far down the road from where the parent ledge is. So, happened to make a natural clipboard here with that little flake of the rock I could stick the map under. But to start that adventure on Mount Monadnock, we parked at the gate on Route 124. We went up the old toll road, which was an easy gravel road for walking in. You could drive it if you were allowed to. We turned east on the Parker Trail. Shot some videos there. Went up the Cliff Walk to the Hello Rock Trail, to the Monte Rosa Trail, right up to the summit of Monte Rosa with the views, and continued on the Smith Summit Trail. On the original part of this video, I planned on coming down the Marlborough Trail here to the Marion Trail, to the Mossy Brook Trail. I didn't have a lot of extra time when I got to the summit. I wanted to look around on the summit. So I decided to take the shortest way back down, which is this White Arrow Trail. Steep and rugged at the top. It took me almost an hour to do the first 3/4 of a mile because of hand over foot, descending rocks with your hands needed to keep your balance and squeeze between boulders. I'd call it difficult hiking, not extremely steep, but probably more difficult on the down climb than the up climb. But once I got to the old toll road, it was easy walking, got down that in about less than a half hour. It took less than 2 hours to descend Mount Monadnock on the White Arrow Trail and the old toll road. And most of that time was spent on the White Arrow Trail because of all the rocks, ledges, and scrambling required. But what an incredible place. I certainly would expect to do more tree ID videos up there in the future, coming from different directions. And I'm sure we could find more varieties of trees. Meanwhile, it's late summer. I've got some lessons in the works, one which is going to be taking a closer look at black gum, which I started in the winter time. And we're going to look at it with its foliage while it's still green and while it attains its beautiful fall colors. And I've got a few other videos in mind. I have to see what I can find while I'm out hiking. I like to do these videos in nature and not in a planted scenario like in an arboretum. So we'll see what I can find as I hike, and we'll continue on.